Are you tired of paying $30 for a piece of meat? Well, you're not alone. My name is Thomas Landon. Join me while I take an $8 piece of meat and try to make it amazing. So as you can see here, I'm starting with two products. One piece of boneless beef grade A strip loin that cost me 118 Maldivian rupiah, which is about $8 US, and one all-natural rock salt. I understand kosher salt also works, but you want a thick, coarse grind of salt. Okay, so first we want to cut the package open and we want to wash the steak off. The steak itself feels quite like it's going to be really chewy. I don't know if you can see that, but it's not flexible or that soft. It's a tough piece of steak, and I think if I cooked this regularly, it'd be like eating rubber, like eating a big piece of rubber. So now I want to dry it off and get it as dry as possible, because I think part of the goal here is to remove moisture or water from the steak. Okay, so I've washed my piece of meat off. Now I'm just drying it, and the next step is to cover it in salt. I really want to get it nice and dry to make sure I get as much of the moisture out of the steak as I can. So now I'm taking the salt and I'm just covering the meat. I want to get it everywhere on this. And the rule of thumb is roughly 1 hour of sitting with the salt crust on for every inch. And this steak looks to be roughly an inch. So I'm going to cover it up nicely here. Okay, so the salt crust on the meat is complete. So now I am going to let it sit in the fridge for an hour, and then we'll get back to you when we start cooking it. To let it sit for an hour, but I actually got busy doing something, which means that it sat for longer than an hour. It actually sat for an hour and 45 minutes. And if you can see here, there is a lot of liquid that has come off of this steak. So the steak is just covered with salt still. Still feels kind of tough to me, but I'm going to go ahead and rinse this off, and then we'll let it sit in some paper towel just to get any moisture from rinsing it off out of the steak. The color has definitely changed. It's much, much, much redder. And again, it feels like there's a layer on it now. I don't know if that's good or bad. I feel like that's not good. But we will proceed. Okay, so I'm just going to trim some of this fat off. Which actually, the fat does feel like it's loosened up quite a bit. Always helps if you have a sharp knife, which I forgot to do. Okay, well, that's going to be it. I'm going to season it lightly with some olive oil, a little bit of salt, some pepper, and I also like a little spice, so a little bit of chili pepper. And I don't have a barbecue here, so we're just going to fry it up and see how it goes. Okay, so here is my steak. I've had it in the fridge for an extra hour just wrapped in a paper towel to soak any last of the moisture out from when I washed it, to get all of the salt off. And there it is. Nice color. It's actually shrunk considerably. When I started, this steak was practically an inch, but now it seems more like half an inch. So, from Costco, of course, you get the nice Himalayan sea salt, so we're gonna put some of that on, pat it in. A little bit of pepper, coarsely ground. And then a little bit of flaked chili pepper, just because I like it to have a little bit of zing to it. So I'm pulling out one of my favorite ingredients, butter. And why not cook the steak in a little bit of butter? Okay, before that gets too hot, turn the element down. And here we go. So we'll time it. I like mine medium rare, which means probably somewhere around 4 minutes aside. Maybe a little bit less, just because this steak is so thin. So let's check back in 4 minutes. Okay, we're actually at 3 minutes, and it seems to be puffing up and cooking, so I don't want to overdo it. So I'm going to flip it here at 3 minutes. And I think we just give it 2 minutes here, again, because it's such a thin cut now. I don't think it'll need the full 4 minutes aside. So we'll check back in a couple of minutes. Okay, we're 3 minutes in on the other side. I've shut the power off now, or the flame. Feels actually like I've overcooked it. So there it is. And now I will make the rest of the meal. I'll let that rest for another 5 minutes or so, and then we'll cut into it and see how it is, if it's good or if it's horrible. And here we go, just cooking up a little bit of broccoli. Okay, let's cut this in half and see what we've done. Cutting it, it feels very difficult and tough to cut. If we look at that, I think that's actually pretty close to medium rare, so I'm happy with the cook. And now let's try it. You know what? It's not super tender, but it's also not super chewy. It is, however, a little bit on the salty side. Would I do it again? For $8? Yeah. I think I got a pretty good meal out of this. And I probably just wouldn't put any salt when I was preparing to cook it. I'd just put pepper and some chilies on it. Anyways, if you have any questions, let me know. But I think it works. My closing thoughts on rubbing salt all over a steak to make it more tender and tastier. I think it might work a little bit. I still think it's important that you start with a good piece of meat, and usually you're going to get that from a good butcher. If you go and get a crappy piece of meat, even if you do a bunch of magic to it, I think it still ends up being a crappy piece of meat. So I enjoyed my dinner, but not as much as I would have if I would have started with a good piece of meat. So that's the moral. You can dress up a bad piece of meat a little bit, but it's still not going to be a good piece, at least not with the limited cooking skills that I have. Maybe if you're Gordon Ramsay, you can do that, but not if you're me.